The call came on a Tuesday morning just before 9. I was at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee and the crossword I never finish. And when I saw Joel's name on my phone, I almost let it go to voicemail. He never called this early. He texted, like every person under 40 seems to do, little bursts of words with no punctuation. A phone call at 8:52 meant something was wrong. I picked up. He didn't say hello. He just said, "Mom, I don't know what to do." I put down my coffee. "Where are you?" "Outside. The park on Delmore. The one near the corner." I knew the park. 2 benches, a rusted swing set, a little patch of grass that turned brown every August. Joel used to ride his bike there when he was 7. I pictured him sitting on one of those benches, and something in my chest went very still. "Is Miles with you?" "Yeah, he's here. Are you safe?" A pause. "She changed the locks, Mom. I went to get more of my things and the key didn't work. I knocked and nobody answered, but her car was in the driveway. I called a locksmith to ask what my options were, and he said without proof I owned the house he couldn't help me. I've been sitting here for 2 hours. I didn't want to call you. 2 hours. My son had been sitting on a park bench for 2 hours with his 5-year-old boy before he called me. "Don't move," I said. "I'm on my way. I want to tell you something about Joel before I go any further, because it matters. He is not a weak man. He is 36 years old and he works hard and he is a genuinely good father. But he is also the kind of person who does not like to ask for help. He gets that from his father, I think, though I try not to say so. When his marriage started falling apart last year, I heard about it the way you hear about things through a door, muffled, partial, enough to worry, but not enough to act. He would say things were fine when they weren't. He would say he had it handled when he clearly didn't. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a tax auditor for the federal government. I have spent the better part of my adult life reading documents that people hoped no one would read carefully, finding the numbers that didn't add up, following the trail from the thing that was claimed to the thing that was true. I am not easily rattled. I am also not easily fooled. When I got to the park, Joel was on the far bench. Miles was sitting beside him eating something from a crinkled granola bar wrapper, and there were 2 garbage bags on the ground at their feet. Just 2 bags. That was everything my son had managed to take from the house he had owned for 4 years before someone decided to lock him out of it. I did not let myself react to the bags. I just walked over and sat down next to Miles and said, "Hi, buddy." He looked up at me with those big eyes. "Hi, Grandma. Dad says we're having an adventure." "That's right," I said. "We are." I looked at Joel over Miles's head. He looked exhausted and ashamed and something else I couldn't name. Defeated, maybe. Like a man who had already decided he had lost before the fight had started. I said, "Tell me everything." He did. It took about 20 minutes, sitting there on that bench while Miles played in the patchy grass nearby. Joel and Gwen had been separated for 8 months. The divorce wasn't final. They were still in the middle of it. Property still unresolved, custody arrangements still being negotiated. The house on Birchfield Lane was jointly owned. Both names on the deed, both names on the mortgage. Gwen's mother, Sandra, had moved in with Gwen shortly after Joel moved out. Joel said Sandra had always been territorial, always been the kind of woman who believed her daughter could do no wrong, and that any problem in the marriage was entirely Joel's fault. He had tried to stay civil for Miles's sake. He had tried to be reasonable. That morning, he had gone to Birchfield Lane to pick up the rest of his winter clothes and a box of documents he needed for the divorce proceedings. He had arranged it in advance. Gwen had agreed. But when he got there, his key didn't work. He tried the back door. Also changed. He knocked for 20 minutes. He called Gwen's phone 4 times. No answer. Then he sat down on the front step and called a locksmith, who told him what I already knew. Without documentation of ownership, they wouldn't touch it. He did not call a lawyer. He did not call the police. He sat there for 2 hours and then he packed up Miles and walked to the park and called me. "Okay," I said when he finished. "Okay?" He looked at me like he expected something more. "Okay, come stay with me. Both of you. Get in the car. Mom, I don't want to, Joel. I said it the way I used to say it when he was 12 and trying to argue about bedtime. One word. He stopped. This isn't a charity situation, I said. This is practical. You need somewhere to sleep tonight, and Miles needs a stable place. And I have a 3-bedroom house that currently holds 1 person and a cat. Come stay with me while we sort this out. That part is simple. He picked up one of the garbage bags. I picked up the other one. Miles ran over and grabbed my hand, and we walked to the car. I want to be clear about something. I was not panicking. I know panic feels urgent, like movement, like doing something. But panic is just noise. What Joel needed right now was not noise. He needed someone who could think clearly and move methodically and not get swept up in the drama of what had just happened. I had been in enough messy situations, professional and personal, both, to know that the first 24 hours after something like this were critical. Not for winning, just for establishing the ground. That afternoon, after Miles was settled in the spare room watching cartoons on my old tablet, I sat down at my kitchen table with Joel and a yellow legal pad. Walk me through the paperwork, I said. Everything you have access to right now? He had his phone. He had a folder in his email with scanned documents, the deed, the mortgage statements, the original purchase agreement. He had a text thread with Gwen from 2 days ago where she had explicitly confirmed he could come by on Tuesday to get his things. I wrote it all down. Then I asked him the question he had been avoiding. Do you have a divorce attorney? He shifted in his seat. I was talking to someone, but I stopped because it was getting expensive, and I thought maybe we could just… Joel. Yeah. Call them first thing tomorrow. Mom, the retainer alone is… I know what retainers cost, I said. I also know what happens when you don't have representation in a contested divorce, and your spouse's mother starts making unilateral decisions about a jointly owned property. Call them. He was quiet for a moment. Do you think she can actually do this? Just change the locks? Here's what I know about property law. I am not a lawyer, and I want to be honest about that. But 31 years of working with financial and legal documents means I have read a great many things I was not formally trained to read. I knew enough to know that what Sandra and possibly Gwen had done was not legal. A jointly owned property cannot be unilaterally locked to exclude one of the owners. That is not a gray area. That is not a gray area. That is not a matter of interpretation. That is illegal. No, I said. She cannot. What she just did is called unlawful exclusion, and it is a serious problem for their side of this divorce, not yours. He looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to believe me. Trust me, I said, and get a lawyer. The next morning, I drove Miles to his kindergarten while Joel made calls. When I got back, he was on the phone with his attorney, a woman named Miss Farrow, and I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and my legal pad and let him talk. When he hung up, he looked slightly less like a man who had already given up. She says the text thread is important, he said. Gwen confirming I could come by, and the fact that both names are still on the deed. Yes, I said, both of those things matter. She wants to file an emergency motion for access. She says it could take a few days, but the judge doesn't look kindly on this kind of thing. I nodded. I poured him a cup of coffee and put it in front of him. What about Sandra? He said. She's the one who actually did it. She's the one who called the locksmith. That's something your attorney will deal with, I said. You stay out of it directly. Don't call Gwen. Don't go back to the house. Don't text anything you wouldn't want read aloud in a courtroom. He wrapped his hands around the mug. I keep thinking if I'd just handled this differently from the beginning, if I'd been more on top of the paperwork, if I'd gotten the attorney earlier. That's not useful right now, I said. Mom, it's not. You can do that later. Right now you focus on the next step, not the last one. He looked at me for a long moment. How are you not more upset about this? I thought about that. The honest answer was that I was upset. I had been upset since the moment I heard his voice on the phone. But I had also learned, somewhere in my 60s, that my upset feelings were mine to manage and not anyone else's problem to absorb. Joel did not need my anger on top of his own. He needed my steadiness. I'll be upset later, I said. Right now I'm busy. Those days had a particular texture to them that I still remember clearly. Miles adapted to my house with the ease that small children have. He found my cat, Biscuit, and declared them best friends, and he ate cereal at my kitchen table every morning with perfect contentment. Joel was harder. He moved through the house like a man waiting for the next bad thing, checking his phone constantly, sleeping poorly, eating without tasting anything. I did not hover. I did not ask him every hour how he was feeling. I just kept the coffee hot and the meals on the table and the paperwork organized, and I let him have space to fall apart a little, which I think is sometimes what people need most. On the fourth day, his attorney called with news. The emergency motion had been filed. The court had reviewed the documentation, the deed, the mortgage, the text confirmation, and agreed that Joel had been unlawfully excluded from a jointly owned property. A hearing was scheduled. More importantly, Sandra had been asked through legal channels to vacate the property, or at minimum to restore Joel's access. Apparently, she had argued that she was there as a guest of Gwen's and had no responsibility for the lock situation. Gwen had said the locksmith was her mother's idea. Sandra had said Gwen asked her to do it. They were already pointing at each other. Joe called me from the back porch after he got off the phone with Ms. Farrow. I could hear the difference in his voice. "They're blaming each other," he said. "Of course they are," I said. "The attorney says this actually helps our side. It shows there was a deliberate plan to exclude me and that it wasn't just some miscommunication." "Yes," she also said. He paused. She said whoever's idea it was, they made a significant legal error and that it's going to come up in the property settlement. I didn't say I told you so. I have never found that phrase useful. I just said, good. There's something I want to say here because I think it gets lost in stories like this one. I was not a hero in this situation. I did not swoop in and fix everything with some dramatic confrontation. I did not stand on Sandra's doorstep and deliver a speech. I did not do anything that required courage or cleverness or special talent. What I did was stay calm. I organized the paperwork. I insisted on the attorney. I made sure Miles had a safe, quiet place to sleep. I kept my son from making decisions out of panic that would have hurt him later. That is not heroism. That is just what you do when someone you love is in trouble and you happen to be the steadiest person in the room. The hearing happened on a Thursday morning. I did not go. Joel went with Ms. Meet You. Farrow and I stayed home with Miles and we made pancakes and then went to the library and then came back and I tried not to check my phone more than twice an hour, which I managed about half the time. He called me at 11:47. We got access restored, he said, effective immediately. And the judge made a note about the conduct. A note? Ms. Farrow said it's the kind of note that comes up again in the property settlement hearing. She said Sandra's involvement and the fact that she's living there without being on the deed or the mortgage is also going to be addressed. She may have to leave. I sat down at the kitchen table. Miles was on the floor with Biscuit, completely unconcerned with any of this, which was exactly right. "How do you feel?" I asked Joel. A pause. Then, "Like I can breathe again." "Good," I said. "Come home for dinner. I'll make the pot roast." He did. He came home and ate pot roast and played on the floor with Miles and Biscuit for an hour after dinner, and somewhere in the middle of it he looked up at me and said, "I don't know what I would have done." I said, "You would have figured it out." "No," he said. "You would have figured it out." "No," he said. "I really wouldn't have. Not in time." I didn't argue with him. Maybe he was right. Maybe without the attorney and the motion and the organized paperwork and the 2 weeks of steady meals, he would have made some panicked decision that cost him the house or the settlement or worse. I don't know. You can't know what the road would have looked like if you'd taken a different turn. What I know is this. He didn't have to take it alone. That's the part that mattered to me. Miles stayed at my house for another week after that, just because Joel was going back and forth dealing with the logistics of access and the attorneys and the staggered move-out arrangement the court had outlined. He and Biscuit were inseparable by the end. When it was time to go back, Miles stood in my kitchen doorway with his little backpack on and said very seriously, "Grandma, I think Biscuit misses me when I'm not here." "I think you're absolutely right," I said. "Maybe I should visit a lot. Maybe I should." He nodded like that settled it. Then he walked out to Joel's car and buckled himself in and waved at me from the window. Joel paused at the door. He had his hand on the frame and he looked at me for a moment without saying anything. "Thank you," he finally said. "Not just for the house, for all of it. You don't have to thank me." "I know I don't have to." He looked down, then back up. "I should have called you sooner. I kept thinking I was supposed to handle it myself." "You did handle it," I said. "You just had some help." He smiled at that. "Just a little." I watched them pull out of the driveway and I stood in the doorway for a while after the car turned the corner. Biscuit came and sat on my feet, which is his version of emotional support. I thought about Sandra. I thought about the moment she must have called that locksmith, the satisfaction she must have felt in that small act of control, taking something from my son by simply changing a key. I wondered if she understood what she had actually done. Not just legally, though that mattered, but the signals she had set. That she thought Joel was the kind of person who would simply accept it. Who would sit on a park bench with 2 garbage bags and call no one and fold. She had miscalculated. Not because I came with a weapon or a speech, but because my son, when he finally called someone who was not going to panic. Someone who knew where the legal pad was. Someone who would answer the phone at 8:52 on a Tuesday and say, "Don't move. I'm on my way." You do not have to be powerful to be useful in a moment like that. You just have to be steady. And if you're going through something like this right now, if you're the one sitting on the bench, or if you're the one who just got the call, I want you to know something. The situation is almost never as final as it feels in the first 2 hours. Documents exist. Courts exist. Attorneys exist. Rights exist. You may not know how to use all of them, but someone does. You don't have to fight alone, and you don't have to panic. Panic is just noise. What you need is the next step. Find it, take it, then find the one after that. That's all it is in the end. One step and then another until you can breathe again. I have thought about that Tuesday morning more times than I can count. Not with anger. The anger came and went in those first few hours, quiet and private, the way I've learned to let things move through me without letting them steer. What I keep coming back to is the image of Joel on that bench, 2 garbage bags, a 5-year-old eating a granola bar, a man who had been sitting there for 2 hours before he called his mother, because somewhere along the way he had decided that asking for help was the same as admitting defeat. That belief almost cost him everything. I think about Sandra too, what she thought she was accomplishing when she called that locksmith. There is a certain kind of person who confuses control with strength, who believes that if you can take something from someone, a key, an access, a sense of safety, you have won something. Sandra locked my son out of his own house, and I suspect she felt powerful in that moment. I suspect she believed he would fold. What she did not account for was the phone call he eventually made. And here is what I want to say about that, because I think it matters beyond the specifics of this particular situation. The choices we make in our worst moments are shaped entirely by what we have built in the quiet ones. I spent 31 years learning to read documents carefully, learning to stay calm when numbers didn't add up, learning that panic is a feeling, not a strategy. I did not build those habits for this situation. I built them because I believed they were the right way to move through the world, and when Tuesday morning came, they were simply there. Joel had to learn something harder, I think. He had to learn that accepting help is not weakness, that there is no prize for suffering alone, that the people who love you are not a burden you spare. They are a resource you trust. He sat on that bench for 2 hours trying to solve it himself, and when he finally called me, we had it moving in the right direction within 48 hours. Not because I am exceptional, because 2 people thinking clearly are almost always more effective than 1 person drowning alone. Miles knew none of this, of course. He made friends with my cat and ate his cereal and declared every morning an adventure. Children have a way of cutting through the weight of things just by being themselves. I am grateful he was there. I think his steadiness helped Joel more than either of them realized. As for Sandra, the court noted what she did. The paperwork recorded it. In the end, the thing she used as a weapon became part of the case against her. That is not irony. That is just how it tends to go when people act out of spite rather than sense. The record remembers. What I hope Joel carries forward from all of this is not the victory. The victory was never really the point. What I hope he carries is the understanding that when something goes wrong, genuinely wrong, not just inconvenient, the answer is not to sit on a bench and wait for it to get worse. The answer is to take the next step. Call the person. Find the document. Ask the question. Move. You do not have to be the smartest person in the room. You do not have to have all the answers before you start. You just have to be willing to begin, and willing to ask for help when you need it, and willing to keep going even when it is uncomfortable and slow and uncertain. That is all resilience actually is, underneath the word. It is not some extraordinary quality that certain people are born with. It is a practice. It is the decision, made over and over again in small moments, to be the kind of person who does not give up when things get hard. Joel made that decision when he called me. I made it 30 years ago when I chose to pay attention instead of coast. Miles will make it someday in a way neither of us can predict yet. You will make it too. Probably sooner than you think.